Welcome to Crime Case Confidential, where we dive deep into the most shocking and perplexing crimes. Today, we uncover the tragic and complex story of Evan Blackwood, a successful real estate agent in the picturesque town of Brentwood, Oregon, whose hidden life and harrowing secrets led to his brutal murder. Evan's murder not only rattled his seemingly peaceful community, but revealed a dark web of lies, betrayal, and heartbreak that no one saw coming. Evan Blackwood, the outwardly perfect realtor. Evan Blackwood was a 49-year-old man living in Brentwood, Oregon. He enjoyed a sterling reputation as a real estate agent, often recognized around town by his sleek silver SUV with the vanity license plate Top Sale. Over the course of more than 20 years in the realty business, Evan's face became synonymous with trusted agent, known for selling upper-tier homes and maintaining a polished, professional demeanor. His colleagues and neighbors described him as friendly, charismatic, and ready with a warm handshake. Evan was married to Helen Blackwood, a dedicated high school principal admired for her discipline and leadership. From a previous relationship, Helen had a son, Asher Scott, whom Evan had effectively helped raise since Asher was in his mid-teens. Evan had graduated from the University of Oregon with a degree in business administration, and he channeled his background into building a robust realty portfolio. Among the locals, if you needed a reliable realtor, Evan's name was always near the top of the list. The Blackwoods lived in a spacious two-story home on Willow Bend Lane, featuring an immaculate lawn and vibrant flower beds. The porch always looked welcoming, and Evan frequently took pride in maintaining the landscaping himself. His neighbors remember him in the early mornings, wearing a baseball cap, trimming hedges, or waving to passers-by with a broad smile. He was also active in community events, sponsoring Little League teams and volunteering with local charities. In fact, he regularly attended church on Sundays, often playing a part in the social gatherings afterward. At first glance, the Blackwoods appeared to be the epitome of a wholesome, successful, and loving family. Anyone gazing at that big house with the tidy yard might have envied the life they imagined happening inside. But behind those walls, Evan Blackwood carried a secret so devastating that once unearthed, it would tear his world apart. The hidden affairs and a double life. For the past 2 years, Evan had been in a sexual relationship with his stepson, Asher Scott. This shocking entanglement remained hidden from family, friends, and the entire community. Evan realized that if word got out, his carefully crafted reputation and livelihood would be destroyed. Worse yet, it could upend Helen's life and career too. On top of this clandestine relationship, Evan also pursued other men, some of them clients or acquaintances, often using the very homes he was commissioned to sell as rendezvous spots. To outsiders, these properties were open houses or private showings. To Evan, they were secret hideaways where he could live out impulses that no one in Brentwood suspected. Managing these double lives weighed heavily on him, even if he rarely showed it on the surface. He juggled closing deals, forging new client relationships, and meticulously scheduling covert meetups. According to some of Evan's closest associates, he had seemed tired or agitated in recent weeks, though no one guessed the true cause. Mounting tension before the murder. In the days prior to his death, Evan was busier than ever. With the summer season driving an uptick in real estate sales, he was trying to finalize multiple deals. Meanwhile, he also had personal matters on his mind. He and Helen were planning a weekend trip to Cannon Beach, hoping the ocean air might help them both unwind. This getaway was Evan's chance, perhaps, to step away from the mounting chaos he felt inside. He had also received an invitation to a friend's barbecue, an event he considered an opportunity to reconnect with old pals. But with his double life straining him, Evan was increasingly on edge, worried that any slip could expose him. He confided in no one, except possibly Asher, who knew part of what he was dealing with, though even Asher wasn't aware of the full extent of Evan's additional affairs. Evan's friends described him as charming and magnetic, someone who made others feel at ease. But behind that polished facade lay enormous guilt over his affair with Asher, alongside the lies necessary to keep it hidden. Lately, he feared Helen was catching on to something, though he had no tangible proof. These pressures built in a slow crescendo, setting the stage for a tragic, violent crescendo. June 24th, 2014. The day everything changed. On June 24th, 2014, around 3 p.m., Helen Blackwood returned from Brentwood High School earlier than usual. She had been dealing with administrative tasks all morning and felt a crushing headache, prompting her to leave the school early. Eager to relax, perhaps watch Netflix, or just curl up with a novel, she stepped into their airy foyer. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss. She placed her keys on the kitchen counter and called out Evan's name. Silence. Mildly unsettled, she decided to check the basement, where Evan often managed his files or flipped channels through old war documentaries. The horrifying discovery. As Helen approached the basement door, she noticed it was slightly ajar. Odd, because Evan typically shut it. She called his name again, louder, but still got no answer. Her anxiety mounting, she descended the steps. The moment she reached the bottom, she froze in shock. Evan's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor. Signs of a violent struggle were everywhere, blood spatters on the carpet and an overturned coffee table. But the most chilling detail was the fireplace poker, its iron tips smeared with blood, resting near Evan's body. Bruises and cuts on Evan's face were evident, and the position of his body suggested a frantic, physical altercation had taken place. Helen screamed in terror, rushing to Evan's side. She shook him, desperately hoping he was still alive, but it was already too late. Overwhelmed and trembling, Helen grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Between gasping sobs, she cried, "My husband! He's dead! There's blood everywhere! Please, hurry!" Police arrive 3:15 p.m. The Brentwood Police Department received Helen's frantic call. Officers arrived swiftly, led by Detective Jordan Moore. Moore was a meticulous investigator in his late 40s, known for approaching crime scenes with a calm, discerning eye. He and his team secured the perimeter, stretching yellow crime scene tape around the property as neighbors began to gather in hushed alarm. Helen, standing on the porch steps in shock, was comforted by Lydia Hanson, the family's next-door neighbor. Lydia had rushed over after hearing the screams. As Helen was escorted away from the immediate crime scene, she kept muttering, "Who would do this to Evan?" unable to process the brutality she had just witnessed. Meanwhile, the officers descended into the basement. The scene was grisly. Furniture toppled, streaks of blood across a nearby recliner, scattered papers that likely fell during the struggle. The fireplace poker was the obvious murder weapon, its metal shaft bent at an unnatural angle from forceful blows. Detective Moore took note of every detail: footprints, potential fingerprints, and any items that seemed out of place. Shockwaves through Brentwood. Word of Evan Blackwood's murder spread rapidly. Neighbors who once admired him from across hedges were stunned to learn he'd been killed in what appeared to be a fit of rage. Groups of onlookers formed near the driveway, whispering theories. Some mentioned a burglary gone wrong, but the violence in the basement suggested something more personal. The usual calm of Brentwood gave way to hushed, anxious conversations. How could something so horrific happen on Willow Bend Lane, the quintessence of small-town tranquility? Gathering clues. The investigation begins June 24, 2014, 3:30 p.m. Detective Moore and forensic specialists started collecting evidence. Photographs. They snapped images from every angle, close-ups of bloodstains, wide shots of the overturned coffee table, and pictures of the bent fireplace poker. Evidence collection. The poker was carefully bagged and tagged. Technicians searched for latent fingerprints using specialized powders. They took swabs from blood pools and gathered any stray fibers from the carpet. Initial observations. Detective Moore noted the basement's state of disarray, suggesting Evan fought hard. However, nothing seemed stolen. If the perpetrator's motive were robbery, they likely would have ransacked the home more extensively. Helen's first statement to the police was tearful and short. She accounted for her day, from her arrival at school that morning to coming home early. She seemed genuinely distraught, repeatedly insisting she couldn't fathom who would want Evan dead. Her alibi, being at work all morning, was quickly confirmed by school staff and time-stamped security footage showing her leaving just after 2:30 p.m. Despite Helen's heartbreak, Detective Moore understood that spouses often topped the suspect list in homicides. Yet there was no immediate evidence linking her to the act. The detective noted her shock seemed genuine. Suspect 1, Helen Blackwood. By standard procedure, Helen remained a prime person of interest. She was brought to the station on June 25, 2014, the day after the murder, for formal questioning. Detective Moore led the interrogation, gently but persistently probing for any friction in her marriage. Helen appeared exhausted, her eyes bloodshot and her voice breaking with emotion. She described her marriage to Evan as mostly solid, though she admitted they'd had minor issues, like any couple. She denied knowing anything about Evan cheating or living a double life. But as the interview progressed, Helen's frustration and sorrow became palpable. She expressed confusion. Why would anyone want to hurt Evan? Even if they had typical spats over finances or scheduling, she saw nothing that would lead to violence. Detective Moore meticulously recorded her answers, aware that in many murders, the immediate spouse is either the culprit or intimately knowledgeable about the victim's hidden secrets. Helen had a verifiable alibi at Brentwood High School. Phone logs showed she'd made calls throughout the day from her office, and staff reported seeing her in back-to-back meetings up until she left early. For now, evidence suggested she hadn't been at home for the murder. Suspect 2, Asher Scott, stepson. The next suspect was Asher Scott, the victim's 21-year-old stepson. Asher was known around Brentwood as a young man with a troubled past. He'd spent his teenage years grappling with anxiety and mild substance abuse. By 21, he had seemingly turned things around, enrolling at a local community college where he studied psychology. He also worked part-time at a popular family restaurant as a server and occasional bartender. June 25, 2014. Asher was brought in for questioning. Detective Moore recognized the delicate nature of the situation. The victim's stepson was typically one of the last people you'd suspect of murder. Still, the detective had to explore every angle. Asher appeared shaken, but cooperative. His hands fidgeted, and he spoke in a hushed voice, repeating that he had no idea who would harm Evan. When asked about his whereabouts during the approximate time of the murder, somewhere between noon and 3 p.m. He said he'd been at work, though he arrived about 30 minutes late for his shift. His manager partially confirmed this, but noted Asher showed up around 12:30 p.m. with an excuse about traffic delays. The shocking confession, Part 1. What Asher didn't initially share was the secret affair he'd been having with Evan for 2 years. That truth emerged only after investigators discovered suspicious text messages on Evan's phone, suggesting an intimate, ongoing relationship. Once confronted, Asher broke down and admitted that he and Evan had been involved in a deeply complicated and unhealthy relationship. A relationship he described as manipulative on Evan's part, yet also one he felt strangely dependent on. Asher insisted he had no intention of harming Evan. He said their relationship had ended recently, largely because Asher discovered Evan had been cheating on him with other men too. "I felt so betrayed," he told Detective Moore, "but I wouldn't kill him. I just wanted out." Despite the red flags, Asher offered an alibi that might stand if corroborated. Asher's DNA in the house was expected since he lived there, but if no other evidence placed him at the crime scene during the murder window, the police couldn't charge him without further proof. Suspect 3. Paula Sanchez, former client and lover. Another name emerged from Evan's phone records: Paula Sanchez, a waitress at a local diner. She had once been a home buyer, touring properties with Evan when she caught him having sex with her own husband in a vacant listings bathroom, an explosive event that led to the end of Paula's marriage. Paula was known for her fiery temper and had confronted Evan several times, blaming him for her divorce. June 26, 2014. Detective Moore questioned Paula. She arrived with a defensive posture, arms crossed, jaw set in anger. Paula openly stated she hated Evan's guts for what he did to her marriage, but claimed she'd never stooped to murder. She had an alibi that she'd been working a double shift at the diner from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. on June 24th. Several co-workers backed her up, and timecard records supported her story. Even so, Paula's rage toward Evan was well known. She recalled telling Evan she wished he'd burn in hell for destroying her life. But words, while certainly hateful, are not the same as a murder confession. With a time-stamped alibi and no physical evidence linking her to the scene, Paula remained a suspect in theory, but not in practice. The police, following standard protocol, kept a close eye on her, but they needed something more concrete before they could pursue charges. Suspect 4. Greg Sawyer, another lover scorned. Within days, a fourth suspect surfaced, a married father of 2 and a financial consultant. Digital evidence revealed a torrid, short-lived affair between Greg and Evan. Detectives discovered heated text exchanges in which Greg berated Evan for lying to him about being exclusive. Greg felt duped, especially after reading rumors or hearing hints that Evan was also sleeping with others, including his own stepson. June 27, 2014. Detective Moore interviewed Greg. The man looked nervous, shifting in his seat, explaining he was at a business lunch from 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. on June 24th. However, not a single person at that lunch meeting recalled his presence, only that he had RSVP'd. Greg claimed he left early, feeling sick, but couldn't produce receipts or a phone record that firmly placed him elsewhere. Greg's anger toward Evan seemed intense, as uncovered texts read, "If you destroy my family, I'll make you pay," and "I can't believe you'd cheat on me." While that provided potential motive, the investigators had no direct proof that Greg had actually gone to the Blackwood home and committed the crime. Still, Greg became a key person of interest, especially once they learned he had no reliable alibi. As with all the other suspects, more investigation was required, forensic deep dive, and the weight of evidence. During these early stages, the crime lab focused on the physical evidence in the basement. The fireplace poker was thoroughly examined for fingerprints, hair, or any fibers that could match a suspect. Early indications suggested multiple sets of partial prints, though some were smudged, making identification challenging. Forensic experts used luminol to detect areas of blood cleanup, revealing additional spatter patterns that had possibly been wiped. DNA results would take days, sometimes weeks, to finalize, but the team hurried to expedite the process due to the high-profile nature of the homicide. The community in Shock Brentwood, Oregon, a quiet town best known for scenic walking paths and well-manicured public gardens, was now reeling from a homicide that peeled back the veneer of civility. Local media outlets clamored for details. Rumors exploded. Some neighbors theorized a secret lover's quarrel. Others believed a spurned ex-client or colleague might have turned vengeful. Still others whispered that Helen might have found out about Evan's affairs and killed him in a crime of passion. What no one publicly knew yet was the darkest twist: Evan's affair with his stepson, Asher, and the complicated feelings that might have led to bloodshed. A grim turn. New evidence emerges. On July 3, 2014, after reviewing data from Evan's personal laptop and other seized electronics, forensic techs made a startling discovery. They found references to a hidden security camera that Evan had apparently installed in the basement. This miniature, motion-activated camera was tucked behind a fake vent cover near the bar area. Detective Moore and his team immediately retrieved the device to analyze its memory card. It had been recording intermittently for the past few weeks, activated whenever it detected motion. If it captured the moments leading up to Evan's murder, it could be the key to solving the case. When the forensic team reviewed the relevant time frame on June 24th, they witnessed something horrifyingly conclusive. 12:05 p.m. The footage shows Evan and Asher in a heated argument. Their conversation is partially audible, with Asher shouting, "I can't keep living like this," and Evan responding, "This isn't just about you." Suddenly, Asher grabs the fireplace poker from its stand near a small decorative hearth. Evan lunges to stop him, but Asher swings the poker. They grapple, and as they move off camera momentarily, sounds of a struggle and pained grunts ring out. Seconds later, Asher reappears in the camera's frame, breathing heavily, the poker in hand, spattered with blood. Evan collapses to the floor. Visibly panicked, Asher stares at Evan's body for a moment. Then he flees the scene. This footage, while grim, was incontrovertible evidence that Asher Scott killed his stepfather in a violent confrontation. Motive, means, and opportunity were all captured on camera. The confrontation and confession. Armed with this damning footage, Detective Moore summoned Asher for another interrogation on July 3, 2014. At first, Asher tried to maintain his prior story, that he'd arrived late to work, had no part in the murder, and so on. But when detectives presented snapshots from the hidden camera video, his facade crumbled. He broke down, crying and stammering. "I didn't mean to. He wouldn't stop lying. I snapped. I was so tired of it all." In a tearful, hour-long confession, Asher explained that their secret relationship had become toxic. Asher claimed he felt manipulated by Evan, who had repeatedly promised commitment, yet slept with countless others, including Greg Sawyer. The final straw, Asher said, was discovering that Evan had told yet more lies, refusing to end his reckless affairs. Overcome by fury and betrayal, Asher confronted Evan in the basement. Things escalated, and in a moment of rage, he struck with the poker. Asher insisted he lost control, not consciously intending to kill Evan, but the outcome was nonetheless fatal. Detective Moore carefully documented every word. By the end of the interrogation, Asher was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The camera footage and confession sealed his fate. The arrest of Asher Scott. On July 4, 2014, just before noon, the Brentwood Police Department officially announced Asher's arrest. The news sent shockwaves through the community. Many had viewed Asher as a quiet, if troubled young man trying to get his life on track. No one had guessed the twisted reality of his relationship with Evan. Suspicions about Greg Sawyer, Paula Sanchez, and even Helen Blackwood were all overshadowed by the sudden clarity provided by the hidden camera. Helen, blindsided by the truth, was left devastated upon learning Evan's affair with her own son had sparked his murder. She, too, had to face the media frenzy, family outrage, and public speculation about how she could have missed such a harrowing secret. Local rumor mills churned, some accusing Helen of turning a blind eye, though no evidence ever emerged to suggest she knew. The trial of Asher Scott courtroom proceedings. The trial for Asher Scott began on August 15, 2014, in Brentwood, Oregon. It became a media spectacle, drawing national attention due to the shocking dynamics of the case: familial ties, a clandestine sexual relationship, and a brutal homicide caught on camera. Prosecution. Led by District Attorney Caroline Reed, a formidable attorney known for her zealous courtroom presence, the state aimed to prove that Asher committed intentional second-degree murder. They pointed to the hidden camera footage as irrefutable proof, insisting Asher's actions, though fueled by emotion, were still deliberate and lethal. Defense. Represented by Mika Sharp, a skilled lawyer who portrayed Asher as a victim of Evan's manipulation. The defense contended that Asher had been groomed and emotionally tormented for years, leading to a sudden explosive break, rather than a premeditated murder. They pushed for manslaughter instead of second-degree murder. Throughout the trial, the painful details of Asher's teenage years, his struggles with addiction, and the emotional toll of the affair were laid bare. It was a harrowing experience for everyone in the courtroom, especially Helen Blackwood, who sat through each day of testimony in silent devastation. She had lost her husband to a grisly murder and now faced losing her son to a long prison sentence. Family and community response. Evan's extended family, including cousins and a few siblings, attended in stunned silence. They'd revered Evan as a successful and gregarious personality. To hear about his secret affairs and the incestuous relationship with Asher was utterly bewildering and horrifying. Emotions ran high, with some relatives grappling with anger, heartbreak, and disbelief, trying to reconcile the Evan they knew with the man described on the witness stand. The Brentwood community watched with equal parts shock and morbid fascination. No one had imagined such darkness simmering behind the pristine facade of the Blackwood household. Local news outlets provided daily coverage of the trial, featuring sensational headlines and heated debates about moral culpability and the boundary between victimhood and criminal liability. The verdict and sentencing. On September 5, 2014, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The hidden camera footage showing Asher's violent act combined with his confession left little room for an alternative conclusion. though jurors seemed to accept that it was not premeditated enough to qualify as first-degree murder. The emotional turmoil Asher experienced was acknowledged, but not enough to absolve him of responsibility. Judge Maria Caldwell, who presided over the trial, weighed the psychological factors before issuing a sentence. She imposed 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole until at least 2/3 of the term had been served. Some in the courtroom gasped at the severity, while others felt it was too lenient given the brutality of Evan's death. Asher dropped his head, sobbing quietly as the sentence was read. Helen wept, torn between love for her son and sorrow for her murdered husband. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. The heartbreak radiating from the Blackwood family made it clear there were no winners in this tragic tale. Aftermath: fractured lives. In the wake of the trial, Brentwood struggled to move forward. The haunting story lingered in the local consciousness, becoming an infamous chapter in the town's history. Asher Scott began serving his 25-year sentence in the Oregon Department of Corrections. Sources indicated he joined therapy programs and continued his psychology studies remotely, hoping to understand the psychological unraveling that led him to commit homicide. Helen Blackwood, forced to resign from her position as principal due to the scandal's scrutiny, found herself isolated and struggling with guilt and public judgment. She eventually moved to a smaller condo on the outskirts of Brentwood, distancing herself from the home and community that reminded her of so much pain. Greg Sawyer was cleared of direct involvement in the murder, but the public exposure of his affair with Evan shattered his marriage. He separated from his wife. Occasionally, locals saw Greg around town, looking worn and remorseful, a man haunted by how close he came to the tragedy. Paula Sanchez tried to rebuild her life after the initial suspicion. Though not culpable for Evan's death, she still carried deep scars from her marriage's collapse, which she blamed in large part on Evan's seduction of her husband. Brentwood as a whole was left shaken. The revelations of incest, betrayal, and violence behind the walls of a seemingly perfect home forced many neighbors to question how well they truly knew one another. The community's attempt to heal. Over time, the shock of Evan's murder faded to a lingering unease. Local pastors and community leaders held town hall meetings and candlelight vigils, emphasizing mental health resources and the importance of checking on loved ones. Some neighbors organized support groups for families dealing with hidden crises. Yet the memory of the Blackwood murder served as a grim reminder of how a carefully polished facade can conceal unimaginable darkness. Helen's friends described her as a woman adrift, mourning two profound losses: her husband to violence and her son to the prison system. She retreated from public life, no longer attending the church events she once frequented with Evan. Meanwhile, Evan's extended family quietly buried the details of his secret life, focusing on the good they had known, though that memory was forever tainted by the brutal truth. Concluding reflections: the murder of Evan Blackwood stands as a chilling reminder that even the most picture-perfect exteriors can conceal devastating secrets. The affair between a respected father figure and his stepson shocked the community, but the betrayal, rage, and violence that followed left scars far deeper than anyone could have imagined. If you found this story gripping, we have another case you won't want to miss. What happens when a cheerleader and her coach cross the line, and their secret affair ends in brutal murder? Click the video on your screen now to uncover this shocking tale. We'll see you next time on Crime Case Confidential. Until then, stay safe. And remember, the truth is often far darker than it appears.